Guess who's really tired and can barely function right now? Spoiler alert, it's me! Hi everyone, my name is Shauna in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. I just got back from SugoiShawn in Seattle and I need to film my March reading wrap-up. But unfortunately I'm really tired, so if I stumble over my words or look like a complete mess, that is why. I haven't done like the average star rating and stuff, so when I do that it'll be up on both my Goodreads and my TikTok. I just need to get this out of the way and film it before I potentially fall back asleep for another nap. I read 9 books this month. Ooh, hi girly pop. I read 9 books this month. A lot of them are like shorter graphic novels and stuff because I did a graphic novel reading vlog. I didn't have any 5-star reads this month. I've only had like 2 5-star reads this year and it's really disappointing, and I think I should do a reading vlog maybe of like my 5-star predictions to see if I can get some more 5 stars. Honestly, how is it already the 4th month in the year and I only have 2 5 stars? That is bad. Like that means that I'm not getting that many favorites and that many books that I'm loving that I'm reading this year, which really epically sucks. If my eyes keep watering in this video, it's because I'm crying, and I literally thought that if I put on my glasses, it would hide how tired I am, and I don't know if it is or not. Also, yeah, I haven't worn my glasses in literally months. I'm supposed to. So maybe that can be my, like, goal for the rest of the year, to wear my glasses more and just stop accepting the blurry vision. God, I gotta chug some caffeine. I like how Hermione is just seemingly settled right there and she's gonna be there for the rest of the video. Look at that cutie pie. The first book I read this month is a physical arc. This one is already out, and this one is For Found Dead by Natalie D. Richards. This one came out in May of last year. I am so behind on reading my arcs, and when I win arcs from Goodreads, like this one, sometimes I also get them after they release, which I'm totally fine with. I love collecting arcs. So this book is a young adult thriller / horror, and it follows these teens who work at a movie theater. So the movie theater that they're working at is about to close forever, and the rest of the mall has been in construction for a while. The shopping mall is basically dead, so the movie theater's dead and it's closing and it's their final night. Then an altercation happens with the people who are there at the movie theater, working at the movie theater. There is 7 workers at this mall that are involved in this story, and they are trying to survive from the killer. Their phones are locked up. They have no phones. There is mostly no electricity, so they are just trying to survive and make it through the horror of a night that is occurring. I honestly don't know why I don't read more thriller books, because I enjoy most of the ones that I read. I think I'm like scared that I'm gonna be scared when I read a thriller book, but this one was really, really good and it worked really well for me. So I think I like thriller books that like make my heart race but don't make me have nightmares and feel paranoid, which meant that this one is perfect for me. Honestly, my favorite part of this whole story is the unique setting, because it takes place in an abandoned mall with an abandoned movie theater. It is so easy to picture the setting. It's so atmospheric. I feel like it would make a perfect TV show, or maybe even a perfect video game, because then you could explore like all the abandoned shops. I feel like it would be really cool. So Jo in this story, the main character, very clearly to me has PTSD. She never has that label like put on her, but I really found that that representation was done really well. I have PTSD. I'm always keen on finding books, especially young adults with PTSD representation. I say especially young adult books because when I was a teen and first having PTSD, I felt so freaking alone, and it was books that gave me an escape and that helped me see that I'm not alone with my PTSD. Insurgent was like the biggest one for me, with Triss struggling with her trauma, and books like this have a huge impact on teens who are struggling with PTSD, because PTSD is so hard to deal with and so many people don't understand it. So books like this are so important for teens to see themselves represented in the way that they respond to their trauma. There's also seizure disorder representation here, which I thought was done really well. I hate to keep pulling myself into my review of the book, but I also have chronic health conditions, and I've always wondered how like that would play out in a book. And I don't get seizures, but I have a condition that can make me pass out. So like having a condition that makes you unable to like move for a bit in the midst of like a horror and thriller situation is really fascinating to read about, and it's something I've always wanted to read about. So I thought that was super cool to see that and see how it played out in the story. I loved the pacing in this story as well. I found that the pacing was perfect. I flew through it. I honestly could have finished it in like 2 nights, but I was trying to spread it out because I started this at like the end of February, and I was like, I want to finish this in March, because before I left for the Comic-Con that started like February 29th, Emerald City Comic-Con, before I left for there, I was like, I'm gonna film my wrap up and then I have to make this spread out into March. So I could have like finished this in 1 or 2 nights, but I purposely timed this right so that I didn't have to refilm my February reading wrap up and add this one in. There's only one downside to this book, which is that there isn't really much of a mystery in here surrounding who the killer is, because you know who the killer is right away. It's very obvious. It doesn't try and hide who the killer is. There isn't like a super big plot twist about like, oh, this person is secretly the killer. Like, you know who it is right off the bat. I thought it would have been a little better if there was more of a mystery there, so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I did mostly enjoy it. If you're wondering like whether this book would be a good fit for you or not, just think about the killer part. Would you be okay reading a thriller book where the killer is known right off the bat, or do you prefer more of a mystery? That's the only thing I have to say, because I know that this book won't work for everyone because of that. But for me, it worked fairly well. I just think it could have like upped it to that 5-star mark if there had been more of a mystery surrounding the killer. Then I finished a manga series, which I am so proud of finishing a manga series. I finished the Demon Slayer series. So I read volume 23, and this is by Koyoharu Gotoge. So I can't really tell you too much about what this is about because obviously spoilers, although I feel like the cover is a bit of a spoiler, but just don't read into this. Like, don't overanalyze what you see here is what I'll say. So basically, in case you don't know about this series, which I'm sure most people know about this series, there's this boy Tanjiro, and he comes home one day and his family has been killed by demons, except for one of his sisters, and his sister has been turned into a demon herself. So Tanjiro joins the Demon Slayer Corps, and he works to avenge his family and find a way to turn his sister back into a human. So it's a super fast-paced and interesting manga, and it has some of the best characters in manga that I've ever read. Like, I love so many of these characters. I love Tanjiro, Nezuko, Muichiro, Genya, Sanemi. Like, I love all of them so much. I want to cosplay literally all of them. Also, speaking of which, look, I cosplayed Tanjiro for the first time. He's been like a dream cosplay of mine for years, and I finally did it. So I thought this was a really sweet way to wrap up the manga series. I liked that there was so much action, but that you also got to see some sort of happy endings for some of the characters. I didn't give it 5 stars though, I just gave it 4 stars. My reasoning why is like, I don't know, I sort of felt this way with like Attack on Titan. I am not necessarily the biggest fan of like time leaps at the very end of a manga series that like time leap super far ahead in advance. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna like spoil what the time leap shows and stuff like that. But yeah, I really recommend this series. It is one of my favorite manga series of all time, and the anime is amazing as well. I know that this series is super popular, but to anyone who hasn't gotten into the series, get into it because you won't regret it. Then I read another arc. This one was a NetGalley arc, so I read it digitally. This is called Broken Valley. It's the 2nd book in the Neskin Chronicles, and it's by Owen Lack. So I didn't know this was a sequel before I like went ahead and requested this book on NetGalley. NetGalley should have like a huge "this is a sequel" like lettering on each book, because the amount of times that I accidentally request sequels is just incredibly large. However, the way that this book was written, it like filled you in on the events from the first book. So I was able to like follow the story, and I didn't feel like I was missing out that much. And also, none of my criticisms for this book had to do with the fact that I didn't read the first book. Like, I have a lot of other criticisms about this book. So essentially, in this series, there is this boy named Aiden. I think it's Aiden. Could be Aiden. I'm saying Aiden. I'm just gonna keep saying Aiden because that seems like the most logical way to say his name. So there's this boy named Aiden, and they live on this planet, and people from Earth had landed on this planet a long time ago, and they like crash landed. There is this old technology that was left behind by the original colonists for this planet, and this technology hasn't been able to be used because you have to have like, I think it's like a genetic code or something that is like right in order to use this technology. However, this boy Aiden is able to use this technology. So this book is the 2nd book in this series. It is queer, it is young adult, although it reads like middle grade. Like, there's young adult content, but like middle grade writing. And it's science fiction, there's romance. Yeah, so let's get into my review. And I have a lot of things I want to say about this book. So first of all, I was reading this book and I wasn't enjoying it very much. And I was looking on Goodreads, and like most of the reviews are 4 and 5 stars. And that confuses me, but also I saw this review, I believe it was on the first book, saying that the author's friends review bombed another author who gave a bad star rating to the first book. So now I'm like, it makes me a little nervous. Like, I don't have any books published, but I really don't want to deal with like the author's friends attacking me, but this is all just allegations. I haven't seen like screenshots of it or proof of it or anything like that. It's just what I've heard by reading other reviews, which could explain why this book has mostly 4 and 5-star ratings, but I am gonna be brave and not just rate what everyone else is rating this book. So I'm gonna cover like the 2 positives and then get into like the negatives, which there's a lot of. So the first thing is that there is good representation in this book, including queer representation and mental health representation. There is tons of queer characters, there's non-binary characters, and each character that is newly introduced in the series is introduced in a very gender-neutral way. For the mental health representation, the main character, Aiden, is said to have panic attacks, but I go as far as to say that it's PTSD, and I think that representation was done really well. I would love it if there's another book in this series where he is specifically labeled as having PTSD, because that's very clearly what he's experiencing. Like, panic attacks are just a symptom of his PTSD, if you know what I mean. And I really like the setting in Port Abra. You have no context into what that means if you haven't read this book, but that's okay. There is one cool setting in the dozens of settings that you get because this book has a lot of traveling. So now the negatives, and there's a lot of them. Also, if you hear a noise back there, I have a box in my room and my cat is currently jumping into the cardboard box because she left the chair to go into a cardboard box because apparently that is more entertaining than being with me. So first of all, this book suffers from second book syndrome. It literally is just a filler book. It's trying to get the characters from one location to another, so it's like mostly traveling scenes because of that. I find traveling scenes to be really boring, especially because traveling scenes feel a lot like filler without actual like content and without like depth and stuff like that. So I found it to be really boring and lacking of substance. Speaking of depth, this book just lacked depth in general. The characters, world building, and the themes felt very surface level. Like, I could see what this author was aiming for, but this author never took that step to make this deeper and more impactful, and because of that, it made it so that everything felt extremely bland and I couldn't get myself as connected to the story as I wanted to be. You know that old tech that I was talking about? It basically overpowers the main character. It makes it so none of the side characters have to do anything, and so the main character doesn't have to think because this device does everything for him. So it makes the main character really weak and pathetic, and he's not even really like necessary to the battle scenes because it's the machine doing everything and not him. I just hate when that happens so much because the main character should be going through struggles, having to make tough decisions and like experience things. But he doesn't do that, especially with all the action scenes, because it's just the machine taking over. So I was not a fan of that. I also found that the writing style was just very bland and simplistic, which made it so it didn't work for me at all. So overall, I gave this book 2 stars, which means I didn't like it. There was like some things I liked about it, obviously, those 2 things that I mentioned. But honestly, I think you can just skip this series if you're looking for a good queer sci-fi. There is better ones out there. God, it's so hot in my room. I might have to take my sweatshirt off in one sec. Oregon weather is so confusing because I can never predict what's going to happen, and not even the weather forecasters are very good at predicting the weathers. Then I read this book, Ghost by Raina Telgemeier. I'm only going to talk about this one briefly because I have a whole reading vlog where I read this one, and that reading vlog will be linked down in the description below, and that is my reading vlog for graphic novels. So this is obviously a graphic novel. It's like middle grade or children's, and it follows these 2 sisters, and this one right here, Maya, has cystic fibrosis, and they end up moving to this small town in the coast of Northern California, and it's to like get away from the city and to get some cool, fresh, salty air to help with Maya's condition. But as soon as they get there, a neighbor lets them in on a big secret. There's ghosts in the city that they live in. So this story was one that I wasn't sure would like, but I'm so glad I ended up reading it. And honestly, I'd recommend that everyone reads this book because I think there's something for everyone with this book. So I'm just going to cover things really briefly. The cystic fibrosis representation is really good and complex, especially for a middle grade story. Maya was my favorite character. I thought she is so sweet, and I loved every scene that she was in this book. I loved how Dia de los Muertos was in here, but the only thing I didn't like about the book is the art style. I know it's the author's like signature art style, but it's just not for me. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. If you want to see a more in-depth review of my thoughts on this book, it will be in my graphic novel reading vlog. Again, that will be linked down in the description below. And another one that I will only cover briefly because it is in my graphic novel reading vlog, Constantine Distorted Illusions by Cami Garcia and Isaac Goodhart. So this is about this boy named Constantine, and he moves to America to join his friend's band. Unfortunately, a spell gets out of hand and he has to deal with the fallout of that spell getting out of hand. So this is a DC graphic novel because Constantine is a DC character. I thought this one was pretty good. I really loved the artwork. It is gorgeous and the color scheme is wonderful. I really like Constantine as a character and I liked his chemistry with his love interest, but I wish that the graphic novel could have been longer because the love, like romance in here, is very insta love, and I feel like this graphic novel would have been a lot better if it was like 4 times as thick, or if it was a series of graphic novels about Constantine so that the romance could sort of progress at a normal pace. Again, also one of the things that could have been expanded on more if it was longer is the like plotline involving Constantine's stepfather, because I thought that was a really good plotline. I just thought that it needed to be longer so that plotline could be deeper. So I would rate this book 3 stars. It is lighthearted, it's not super deep, and it's super magic filled, so I think some people like this book. I don't think it's for everyone because it just lacks a lot of depth and like content since it's so short, but I personally liked it. It's not like my favorite, but it is pretty good, so I would recommend it if this sounds at all interesting to you. And then I finished a goal for this year, finally. One of my goals was to read at least 2 books by Ben Alderson, and I just finished the second book by Ben Alderson that I wanted to read for this year. I read Heir to Thorn and Flame by Ben Alderson, obviously by Ben Alderson. It is a part of the Court of Broken Bonds series. So there is this guy named Max, and he is a like servant or worker for the royal family in this series. There has been no magic in this land for a really long time. Magic has been banished, but then he discovers that he has magic, and the king finds that out and forces him to take the place of the king's dead son, and he ends up roped into a marriage because of his powers and everything that happens from that. Disclaimer, I love Ben. He is a great person. I've been watching him on YouTube since I was in, I want to say middle school, possibly just high school, I'm not 100% sure, but I've been a huge fan of Ben for a long time, and I've talked to Ben a lot. He is such a great person. This book didn't work for me though, and I'm hoping this was just like a one-off thing and not just that like his writing has gone downhill. So my biggest issue is just how slow this book is. It crawled along at a really slow pace. Whenever the action was occurring, I was still bored because the writing felt really slow. It didn't feel like Ben's normal action-packed writing. There's sort of a love triangle in here, or like there's sort of a, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without spoiling it. Sort of like a shift in who the main character is interested in, and I felt the Cameron parts of the love triangle and the romance to be just really unbelievable. He immediately comes off as really gross and manipulative, and I don't understand how Max could have like any interest in him. Also, it's very clear who the actual love interest for this series is, like right off the bat. You like immediately see attraction between Max and his actual love interest, but then it's like tried to force onto us that Max is also like feeling things for Cameron, and I'm like, nope, that's not what I'm getting. I know what was intended, it's just not what I'm getting. I found every plot twist in this book to be really predictable because there was too much foreshadowing. I also found that I never connected to the main character. He just felt sort of bland. I mean, there's nothing exactly bad about him. He's just sort of bland. It doesn't have much of an interesting personality. That being said though, there were some things I liked about the book. I liked Simeon. He is amazing. He is such a great like character in this story, and I enjoyed seeing both his like soft side and his like protective side. Beatrice was another character that I absolutely loved, and I'm interested to see how her plotline progresses, but I'm also nervous because I feel like there's the potential that Ben might be killing Beatrice off, and she is either my favorite or second favorite character in the series, and I'm gonna be so mad if she dies. I also love the world building in the series. While the world building did feel dense at some points and that made it a bit slow, I still found that there were some really interesting things in the world building, like the amplifiers, the way that the murders were recorded on them, the marriage customs, and things like that were super fascinating and fun to read about. So I thought the premise for this book was really good. I thought there was a few good things about this book, but honestly, I just can't get past the slow pacing and Cameron. So that is why I gave this book 2 stars, and it kills me to give it such a low star rating because I love Ben and I loved everything else that he's written, but this one did not work for me. And then I read another Demon Slayer volume, but this is like not connected to the main series, sort of. So basically with Demon Slayer, there is the 23 main volumes. There's Corpse Records, there is Stories of Water and Flame, I believe there's one for the Wind Toshira as well, and there is like Demon Slayer like school at you. So I read the Stories of Water and Flame. So the original concept for Demon Slayer was by Koyoharu Kotoge, but oh gosh, I don't know how to say this person's name. Ryoji Hirano is the person who wrote this like standalone. I mean, I'd recommend that you read the main series first, of course, but there's 2 stories in here, and then at the end there's like, God, what is it called? Kimetsu Between the Scenes. I like the 2 stories. Was not a huge fan of Kimetsu Behind the Scenes. I just found that Behind the Scenes was super just random and disconnected, and it was really confusing. So I think that this author was the perfect choice to write this collection because this author clearly gets these characters to a deep extent that I'm super amazed by. Like, honestly, if I didn't know that this was written by a different author, I would have thought it was written by Koyoharu Kotoge because of how incredibly well written this is. I loved Gyu's story the most. I loved getting to see his interactions with Shinobu, and I loved seeing him interact with a little doggy. It was so cute. Shinobu also was like a huge scene stealer. She was incredible in here. And then the second story is following Rengoku and Mitsuri. So I liked how the flashback scenes from the main series were incorporated into that story, and I loved the action. I loved getting to see Mitsuri before she becomes a Hashira and Rengoku before he becomes a Hashira. I thought that was really interesting to see. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I do recommend this one if you're a fan of the Demon Slayer series, because I think that most Demon Slayer fans will enjoy this. Just, I sort of skimmed that much right here because that's the Kimetsu Behind the Scenes, but everything else about this manga was perfection. Still have 2 more books to go, and the sweatshirt's coming off because I'm too hot. I wanted to read a quick book after I read that Demon Slayer manga, and so I read Locomotion, which I thought was a standalone, but is evidently part of a series. This is by Jacqueline Woodson. She is one of my favorite authors. I've read 3 of her books so far. One of them was 5 stars, and the other 2 are 4 stars. So this is a book that is told mostly in verse, but there is also some parts that are told in other forms of poetry, like there's that type, there's a haiku right there. I love books in verse, and honestly, Jacqueline Woodson like thrives with writing on verse. She is so good at verse writing. So this book follows a 7-year-old named Lonnie, or Locomotion. He had a traumatic past, to say the least, and he had a devastating loss, and it's about him putting his feelings onto paper through poetry and finding an escape in poetry. Documents his life in the foster care system. It addresses the reality of how loss impacts young kids, and also addresses a lot about how the foster care system can separate siblings and the impacts that that has on the kids. I'm gonna read one of my favorite parts of the book really quickly. Writing makes me remember. It's like my whole family comes back again when I write. All of them right here, like somebody pushed the rewind button. So I found this book to be really deep and interesting. It deals with a lot of hard-hitting topics. I read this in an hour since it's so short, but even though I read it in an hour, I've been thinking about it a ton ever since. It's one that has really impacted me and given me a lot to think about. There were some topics in this book that definitely could have been explored more, like sickle cell and religion, but I think that Woodson really managed to reach a level of deepness and depth that I wouldn't have thought would have been reached in this short of a page count and in a children's novel at that. The poem that resonated with me the most, besides the one that I read off to you, I'm not gonna like read everything off about this particular poem because it has huge spoilers in there about the loss. This one right here, December 9th, has had a huge impact on me because it shows the way that trauma victims often react on the anniversary of their traumatic events, which really resonated with me because July 4th is a really hard day for me every year, and yeah, I really felt seen through the poem December 9th. So this book really packs a punch despite its size, so I'd recommend it to everyone, especially if you are looking for something really deep and emotional. Don't let the fact that it's in verse throw you off. Verse is such a fun style of writing, and I think that more people should try verse. You fly through it. There is some really surprising depth in books that are written in verse. So yeah, I gave this one 4 stars, and Jacqueline Woodson, I feel like, is easily becoming one of my favorite authors. I feel like I'm gonna be judged for this final one that I read, but let me explain myself for a sec. I'm doing a reading challenge that's like year-long. It's in this like Goodreads group that I'm in. It's called Shine and Shadow. That's the Goodreads group. Everyone should join it. It's a great group. So I'm doing this challenge that's year-long called Zombies Run, and there's different prompts, and the prompts fall under different categories like food and general supplies, medical supplies, energy sources and transportation, things like that. Basically, there was this prompt under food and general supplies called beef jerky, read a book that features an exotic animal, and I was like, I don't know what to do for this. I considered doing Harry Potter at first, and then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna be reading this while I'm in Seattle for SakuraCon. I'm not gonna bring like a Harry Potter book up with me. I'm just gonna do like an iBook on my phone. So I scrolled through the iBooks app and I was like, which ones have an exotic animal? Because this will help me achieve my goal of reading 4 iBooks. So like, yeah, this was the first one of 4 that I'm reading this year, and the one that I found that fits for this prompt is The Polar Bear's Fake Mate by Sophie Stern. Do not judge me. It is so humiliating to read a book and talk about a book where the cover is a shirtless guy. And I hate the cover is a shirtless guy just because it's so awkward, and also because this book isn't even that like spicy and sexual, so like, why is there a shirtless guy on the cover? Literally, why? So this is a paranormal romance with shifters. So basically there's this guy named Justin, and he has someone who is like making photos to make it look like he's this like playboy and sleeping around and make him look bad, and he's the CEO of this company. And so his mom convinces him to take on a fake mate, like do a fake marriage. So he finds this girl named Rebecca. Rebecca has been having a hard time finding a good steady job, and her roommates are gonna be going to Europe for a while, so she's like, why not take up this business offer and join this fake marriage? Obviously feelings brew from there, and yeah. Hear me out for a sec. I find that some books are so bad that they're funny, and that makes me enjoy them, which was the case for this book. It's like Twilight, okay? Like, the books are trash. I am full well aware of that, but they are so trash that they're funny, and that makes them entertaining to me. So let's talk about the good first, and then we'll talk about the bad, and then we'll talk about the so bad it was funny parts. The good, I liked the premise. I think fake marriages are really interesting to read about in books, and I thought that the shifters added an interesting twist to the fake marriage trope. I liked the locations. They were really beautiful and easy to picture. I didn't like Rebecca as a main character, but I thought that there were some really good things about her in this book. She is fierce, and she was not scared to make her thoughts known and to stand up for herself. I was really scared that this was going to be a book where it's like alpha male, submissive woman, but this book didn't do that, and I was so happy about that. And her body was also described as very like curvy, and it was described in such a beautiful way, and I was like, we have a similar body type. I'd never want to be in her position since it just does not sound fun, but I was like, this is great that I'm seeing a body like mine represented in a book, especially a shifter book. That was really fun. The bad parts that weren't funny. The romance is very insta-love, which made it cringy. Some of the plot lines definitely should have been developed further, like the cancer plotline and like the conversation that Rebecca overheard. Like, why wasn't that deeper? The writing is nothing special. It is very bland and simplistic. I did not like the extent of what the shifters could smell. Leave it at that. Yeah, I'm not going to talk like super explicit on here, but there's some other explicit things that I was like, why? Why do you have to say that? Okay, now here's the parts that were so bad that they're funny. First of all, this whole series that this book is a part of is called Rar County. How can you legitimately like write an adult series and call it Rar County and hope that people take it seriously? Like, literally, the main character lives in Rar County. I can't get over it. It's so funny. I can't get over it. I love this quote. I stood at the front desk smiling at the receptionist like some sort of socially awkward shark, because it's so like random and such a bizarre description, but also like it's also how I feel a lot. There's this whole super long passage about Rebecca walking into Justin's house for the first time and thinking that he's a beekeeper because she smells honey. She makes this big deal out of asking him if he's a beekeeper and searching around his house trying to find this honey, and she's finally like, what is that smell? And he goes, honey. And she was like, oh, like, what's this smell coming from? And he's like, a wax melt. And she's like, has her mind blown that he has a wax melt. And I'm like, girl, I know that you didn't have much money, like, and that's why you're taking up this offer to do a fake marriage and be paid for it, but you know what a wax melt is. Why are you acting like it's so wild and amazing that he has a wax melt? And why is your first thought that he's a beekeeper? He lives in freaking like Colorado, where it's like snowy a lot, and cold. Like, why is that her first thought there? Like, her single brain cell was not working in that moment. And then the biggest part that was the funniest, and part of the reason I was laughing so much with this book, is the allergy plotline, specifically cherries. Justin is allergic to cherries, and it's a huge plot point. It's like one of the biggest conflicts in the book, if not the main conflict. So you learn right off the bat, in the midst of like the whole Playboy scandal, that he's allergic to cherries, and that his mom is so concerned that he's going to be poisoned and somebody's going to take over the company because they're going to poison him with cherries. And Justin is like, oh, that is such a real and valid concern. I could be threatened if someone knew I was allergic to cherries. He's not even allergic to the point where like if he touches it or like smells it or is near it that he'll die. Like, it's just if he ingests it. And it's cherries. It's not a common food. And the thing about this whole like cherry plotline is like, I'm allergic to wheat and I get severely sick if I even so much as like touch it briefly with my finger and have my finger go in my mouth. So I have to be like very cautious when I put anything in my mouth that I touch with my fingers. I can't even like share water bottles with people who have wheat and stuff. Like, I have a severe allergy. I would never be this like obsessed and weird about my allergy. Like, I don't think about it all the time. I think about it maybe like once a day, or if someone offers me something to drink, I think about it. Like, that's the extent I think about it. I don't think about it like nonstop like Justin and his mom do. And like, this dude literally says that he's more scared to tell people that he's allergic to cherries than he is of telling them that he can shift into a freaking polar bear. And then he finds out Rebecca's allergic to shrimp. Oh my gosh, a match made in heaven. They both have allergies. He's like, we are meant to be. We both have allergies. Even though shrimp is like seafood, more of a common allergy, and he's allergic to like cherries, which I feel like is an obscure allergy. You get the idea. I don't want to spoil more of the allergy plotline because it gets a lot more intense than that. But it's so like odd that the author's so obsessed with this whole cherry allergy. I don't know like what went through the author's brain when writing this, but it came out so funny, and that made this story so enjoyable for me because of how funny it was. So I didn't rate this one based on whether it was good or bad. I rated it based on my enjoyment level, and because it was so bad that it was funny, I gave it 3 stars. Don't judge me, okay? It's like cringy, but it's funny. Honestly, I don't recommend like reading this book if you're wanting like a book to take seriously. Only read this book if you're okay with reading books that are so bad that they're funny, because I feel like that's the only way to enjoy this book, because this book is objectively a very bad book, but it's so funny. So yeah, those were all the books I read this month. I talked so long that like my raw footage says 45 minutes up there. I'm like looking at the number. So gotta take some time to edit this. Also, school started back up again, so gotta like edit this fast and get it up. I hope all of you had a great March, and I hope your April is just as amazing. I talked about Comic-Cons earlier in this video, and if you're like a Comic-Con fan, just heads up, my next Comic-Con will probably be Anime Impulse Seattle, so I'm very much looking forward to that one. And if you're going, hit me up and we could meet up if you want to like hang out or anything. If you would like to follow me on my social media, my Instagram, TikTok, Goodreads, all that jazz will be linked down in the description below. All of my cosplays and stuff are over on my Instagram and TikTok. Now I gotta go edit this video and then do some schoolwork. Sucks being in college still. I'm on year 7 of college, is that right? Yeah. Started college in 2017. I'm on year 7. I wish I could just quit. Anyways, before I get into more of an existential crisis, I should probably go. So I'll see all of you in my next video. I try and upload a video once a week, so stick around until next week for my next video, and until next time, goodbye!